Commander Tessa Volk was having what she considered a decent morning until her comm unit started screaming at her like a caffeinated alarm clock. She'd been enjoying a cup of coffee that technically violated 3 health regulations, and now the Galactic Council wanted her in the chamber immediately for an emergency session. Emergency sessions were never actually emergencies. Last month's emergency had been about font sizes on treaty documents. She dragged herself to the council chamber, where roughly 40 different species were making roughly 40 different types of agitated noises. At the center of the chaos stood Chirrik, the royal genealogist for the Krovenian Empire. Chirrik looked like someone had given a flamingo anxiety and a doctorate. His feathers were ruffled in a way that suggested he'd rather be literally anywhere else. "Commander Volk," Chirrik chirped, his translator giving his voice a slight British accent for reasons nobody understood. "Thank goodness. We have a situation." "Define situation," Tessa said, still holding her contraband coffee. "The Krovenian royal bloodline has been compromised." Tessa waited. "Compromised how? Somebody marry a commoner? Because I've got to tell you that's really not my department." Chirrik's feathers turned a shade of purple that the translation guide in her heads-up display labeled as severe embarrassment. "We completed the genetic mapping project. 10,000 years of royal lineage, traced back through DNA sampling of every recorded monarch. The funding alone was astronomical, but His Eternal Radiance insisted on verifying the purity of the celestial bloodline." "Okay, and?" "The founding monarch, David the Divine, was not Krovenian." Tessa blinked. "So he was from one of the other species in the Empire. That's awkward, but hardly—" "He was human." Tessa stopped mid-sip. Coffee dribbled down her chin. "Excuse me?" Chirrik pulled up a holographic display that showed a genetic breakdown that looked like someone had thrown a rainbow into a blender. "According to our analysis, the founding father of the Krovenian Empire was a human male. Specifically, his name was Dave Martinez. We cross-referenced with your species' genetic database. It's a 99.7% match. That's impossible. Humans didn't have spaceflight 10,000 years ago. We were still hitting each other with sticks and arguing about agricultural subsidies. Nevertheless, the evidence is irrefutable." Before Tessa could process this information, the chamber doors exploded open with the kind of dramatic flair that required both a special effects budget and an overinflated sense of self-importance. His Eternal Radiance Vex Athor the 17th entered, which was the short version of his name. The long version required a bathroom break in the middle. Vex looked like an iguana that had been stretched, painted purple, and given a crown that probably cost more than Tessa's entire education. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. "What?" Vex announced, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. "Is this nonsense about my lineage?" Tessa watched Vexathor process the information with all the grace of a computer trying to divide by 0. His face went through several colors that weren't usually compatible with living organisms. "Human?" Vex sputtered. "Humans are those tiny pest species that only joined the Council 200 years ago. The ones who brought their entire internet with them and tried to convince everyone that something called memes were a legitimate form of communication. That's us," Tessa said cheerfully. "Also, memes are legitimate communication, and I'll die on that hill." Vex turned to Chirrik. "You're telling me that my entire lineage, 10,000 years of divine rule, of celestial bloodline, of genetic supremacy that has justified my family's control over 47 star systems, originated from a species that considers deep-fried butter a delicacy?" "In our defense," Tessa interjected, "we only did that once, and the guy who invented it immediately had a heart attack. We learned our lesson." "This is unacceptable." Vex's voice cracked. "The entire legitimacy of my throne rests on bloodline purity. Do you understand what this means? Every treaty, every territorial claim, every legal precedent for the last 10 millennia is based on celestial divine right." Ambassador Krell of the Zintharian Collective, who looked like a 7-foot praying mantis wearing a 3-piece suit, stood up with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for winning the lottery. "Point of order. The Zintharian Collective formally disputes the Krovenian claim to the Sigma Epsilon sector, which was ceded to the Empire in the Treaty of Kaldresh approximately 800 years ago. If the royal bloodline is fraudulent, All territorial agreements are void. Oh, come on, Tessa groaned. Within 30 seconds, half the council chamber was shouting. The Borellian ambassador demanded a recount of voting shares. The tentacled representative from the Aquarius cluster started filing motions that printed out in hard copy, which was just spiteful. Even the normally peaceful fluffians who looked like ambulatory teddy bears were aggressively waving protest signs. Vex grabbed a ceremonial breathing apparatus and started hyperventilating into it. His attendants rushed forward with what Tessa could only describe as a fainting couch. For a species that claimed genetic superiority, they certainly had a lot of medical equipment on standby. Tessa set down her coffee. All right, everyone shut up for 5 seconds. The translator system amplified her voice across 73 languages simultaneously. The chamber fell silent, mostly from shock that a human was giving orders. First, humans aren't extinct, obviously. I'm standing right here. Second, I have no idea how one of my people founded your empire 10,000 years ago, but I'm going to find out. Third, nobody's dissolving anybody's government until we understand what actually happened. And fourth, Krell, if you file one more motion in hard copy, I'm going to personally jam that printer somewhere anatomically uncomfortable. Krell's mandibles clicked in annoyance, but he sat down. Vex lowered his breathing apparatus. You'll investigate? I'll investigate. But Vex, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that your entire governmental system is based on a hilarious misunderstanding. How is this hilarious? Tessa grinned. Oh, buddy, just wait. The Galactic Archives smelled like old books and broken dreams, which was impressive considering everything was digital. Tessa had assembled what she generously called a team. Chirrik was there because he had access to the Royal Genetic Database. Marcus Webb, a human historian who specialized in colonial-era disasters, had arrived via the fastest transport available. And then there was Glorp. Glorp was a gelatinous archivist from the Blobnar Consortium who communicated through color changes. Tessa wore translation goggles that narrated Glorp's emotional states, which was less helpful than it sounded. Glorp is feeling optimistic about the search parameters, her goggles announced as Glorp rippled through shades of teal. Great. Can you pull up human colonial records from 10,000 years ago? Glorp shifted to amber. Glorp is experiencing mild frustration at the vagueness of that request. Marcus leaned over a holoprojector, scrolling through files. 10,000 years ago puts us right at the beginning of the first expansion. Humanity had just developed functional FTL drives, and we were sending out colony ships like somebody was giving out prizes for bad decisions. Sounds about right, Tessa muttered. Here we go. Marcus highlighted a file. The Endeavor, colony ship carrying 5,000 people, heading for a system designated New Terra. It vanished approximately 9,800 years ago. Total loss. No distress beacon, no debris field, nothing. Chirrik's feathers perked up. That timeline aligns with the founding of the Krovenian Empire. Can you cross-reference passenger manifests? Tessa asked. Marcus pulled up a list. 5,000 names. This is going to take forever. Try Dave Martinez. Marcus typed. Paused. Holy hell, Dave Martinez, 32 years old, maintenance technician 2nd class, assigned to environmental systems. He pulled up a photo. The man in the image looked aggressively average. Brown hair, brown eyes, slight stubble, wearing a jumpsuit with a name tag. He was smiling at the camera like someone had just told him a moderately funny joke. That's Dahavid the Divine? Vex had insisted on joining them, and he stared at the photo like it had personally insulted him. He looks like he repairs air conditioning units. That's because he did, Marcus said. Says here he had certifications in HVAC systems, basic plumbing and electrical work. Chirrik was frantically comparing the photo to historical artistic renderings of the founding monarch. The facial structure matches. This is definitely him. But our records show he arrived in a chariot of fire and spoke with the voice of the cosmos. That was probably his escape pod, Tessa said, and the voice of the cosmos was likely a malfunctioning translator. Glorp shifted to bright yellow. Glorp has found something interesting. A new hologram appeared, showing a distress beacon ping. It was faint, corrupted by time and distance, but the timestamp matched the Endeavor's disappearance. The location coordinates mapped to the Krovenian homeworld. One escape pod, Marcus breathed. One survivor. Tessa leaned back in her chair. So Dave Martinez, maintenance technician, crashes alone on a primitive alien planet. No backup, no rescue coming, no way home. And somehow becomes their god king. Vex added weakly. Well, Tessa said. He had a flashlight and probably a first aid kit. To a pre-industrial civilization, that's basically magic. Chirrik was pulling up more files. We have artifacts, physical objects preserved from David's temple. They've been in sealed vaults for millennia, treated as holy relics. Let me guess, Marcus said. Wrench? Roll of duct tape? Maybe a protein bar wrapper? A metal tool of unknown purpose? A silver adhesive strip? And a foil container with faded writing. Nailed it. The recovered artifacts had been treated with more reverence than most religions treated their actual gods. Each item sat in its own climate-controlled case, surrounded by security fields that could probably stop a small asteroid. Tessa stared at what was clearly a standard-issue emergency toolkit and tried not to laugh. Your civilization has been worshipping a socket wrench for 10,000 years. Vex looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. It was said to be the celestial adjuster, capable of bending reality to the divine will's specifications. It adjusts bolts, Marcus said helpfully. Pretty much just bolts. But the real treasure was what Glorp found in the deepest archive. A data crystal, primitive by modern standards, but intact. It had been sealed in what the Krovenians believed was a sacred prayer box. In reality, it was a waterproof equipment container with a biohazard symbol on it. Can we access it? Tessa asked. Marcus pulled out a portable interface. This is old tech, but we've got compatibility protocols. Give me a second. The holodisplay flickered to life, and suddenly they were looking at Dave Martinez, recorded 10,000 years ago. He sat in what appeared to be a prefab emergency shelter, looking tired but amused. Okay, this is log entry 1, Dave's voice said. If anyone's finding this, congratulations. You've discovered the most awkward situation in human history. My name is Dave Martinez. I'm a maintenance tech from the colony ship Endeavor, and I have apparently become the god king of an alien species. This was not in my job description. Tessa couldn't help but grin. The logs continued chronologically. Dave had kept meticulous records, partly for his own sanity and partly because he hoped someone would eventually find them and understand what happened. Day 47. The locals have figured out I need to eat. They keep bringing me food that I'm 90% sure is toxic. So I've been teaching them agriculture using seeds from my emergency kit. They think I'm performing miracles. I'm literally just planting tomatoes. Day 93. Introduced the concept of personal space. They were all sleeping in one big pile, which is cute for them, but I need my own area. They've now built a separate structure for me. It has a throne. I don't know where they learned what a throne was, but here we are. Day 182. I sneezed today and said Gesundheit to myself. They've started chanting it at sunrise. I've created a religion by accident. This is fine. Everything is fine. Vex had gone through so many colors that Tessa was concerned about his cardiovascular health. This cannot be real. Day 321. They want me to choose who leads them. I tried to explain democracy. They just kept bowing and asking for my divine judgment. So I picked the one who seemed smartest and told everyone they had to listen to her unless she was being unreasonable, in which case they should vote on it. This compromise has satisfied no one, but at least nobody's fighting. Marcus was laughing so hard he had to sit down. He invented constitutional monarchy by accident. Day 547. They've built a temple around my sleeping quarters. I don't have the heart to tell them it's just a prefab emergency shelter with decent insulation. Also, they keep asking me to bless things. I've been making it up as I go. Today I blessed a rock. It was just a rock. They're going to put it in a museum. The logs went on for years. Dave taught them mathematics, basic medicine, agriculture, and conflict resolution. He never claimed to be divine, but he also never explicitly denied it because he was worried they'd have an existential crisis. Day 2091. I'm getting old. My emergency med kit is keeping me alive way longer than I should be on this planet, but eventually, biology wins. I've taught them everything I can. They have writing now, actual government, and they've stopped the ritual sacrifices, which was a big win from year 5. If they remember me, I hope they remember I tried to help. The final log was dated nearly 40 years later. Day 14,208. This is probably my last entry. I'm 89 years old, which is pretty good considering I've been eating alien food for 60 years. I've had a good life here. Weird, but good. I have kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids, and honestly, I stopped counting after that. Here's the thing whoever finds this needs to know. I didn't want to be a king. I just wanted to help people who needed help. If they built something good from that, then great. But don't let them use my name to justify cruelty or arrogance. And if they're still doing that Tuesday ritual where they chant at the sky, you can tell them I made that up because I was bored. Sorry about that. The recording ended. The archive room was completely silent except for the hum of the environmental systems. Vex sat down heavily. Our entire civilization was founded by a maintenance worker who was improvising. A pretty good maintenance worker, though, Tessa said quietly. The council chamber had somehow gotten more chaotic than before, which Tessa hadn't thought possible. Krell was on his third motion to dissolve the Krovenian Empire. The Borellian delegation was demanding reparations for historical grievances, and someone had started a betting pool on whether Vex would abdicate. Tessa stood at the central podium with Chirrik, Marcus, and a deeply depressed-looking Vex. Glorp was providing moral support by turning encouraging shades of green. "All right, everyone," Tessa announced. "We've completed the investigation. Here's what we know. 10,000 years ago, a human named Dave Martinez crash-landed on the Krovenian homeworld. He helped a primitive civilization develop agriculture, government, and basic technology. They made him their king because he had a flashlight. That's it. That's the big secret." Krell stood immediately. "Then the Krovenian claim to divine right is fraudulent. All territorial agreements must be renegotiated." "Not so fast," Marcus interjected. "Dave didn't conquer anyone. He was adopted by the local population who wanted his help. There's no fraud here. Just a really weird misunderstanding that lasted 10 millennia. The bloodline is still contaminated," insisted Ambassador Prill of the Borellian Concordat, who looked like a crystalline snake. "Genetic purity was the foundation of their legitimacy." Chirrik stepped forward nervously. "Actually, about that. We completed a full genetic analysis of his eternal radiance." Vex groaned. "Oh no. You're 47% human," the chamber erupted. Vex looked like he wanted to crawl into his own throne and die there. "How?" Vex sputtered. 10,000 years of breeding, hundreds of generations. How am I nearly half human?" "Dave's genes were aggressively dominant," Chirrik explained, "likely due to genetic modifications common in early colony settlers. The traits kept expressing themselves generation after generation." "So, you're telling me," Vex said slowly, "that I have been ruling 47 star systems based on genetic superiority, and I'm basically half maintenance technician?" "Yep," Tessa said. "Also, you probably have a genetic predisposition for being really good at fixing air conditioners. This is a disaster." Krell was practically vibrating with excitement. "The Krovenian Empire must be dissolved immediately. The throne has no legitimate foundation." "Actually," Marcus said, "it has the most legitimate foundation possible, the consent of the governed. Dave didn't take power. It was given to him because he helped people. That's more legitimate than most monarchies in the galaxy." "But the divine right," Prill started. "Was always nonsense," Tessa interrupted. "Everyone here knows that bloodlines are a terrible way to determine leadership. We've just all been pretending otherwise because it was convenient. But here's what actually matters. The Krovenian Empire exists. Billions of people live under its government. They have lives, families, businesses. You can't just dissolve a civilization because you don't like how it started." "Then what do you propose?" Krell demanded. Tessa looked at Vex. "Reforms, real ones. Dave tried to teach them democracy. Maybe it's time the Krovenian Empire actually listened to him. Constitutional monarchy, elected representatives, actual accountability." "Absolutely not," Vex said automatically. Then he paused. "Wait, What were you saying about constitutional monarchy? You get to keep your fancy title and your throne, Tessa explained. You just don't get to actually run everything. The people elect representatives who handle governance. You're a figurehead, basically. Show up for ceremonies, wave at crowds, cut ribbons at hospital openings. Vex considered this. So I'd still be emperor? Sure, just not a dictator. And I wouldn't have to deal with agricultural policy debates or infrastructure budgets? Nope, that's what the elected parliament would handle. Vex's expression slowly shifted from horror to something approaching relief. That actually sounds amazing. Do you know how boring agricultural policy is? It's so boring. It's the worst part of being emperor. Krell slammed his appendage on his desk. This is unacceptable. The Xantharian Collective demands nothing, Tessa said firmly. Because if you push this, I'll make sure every single one of Dave's logs gets published. All 14,000 entries, including the ones where he talks about trying to establish diplomatic contact with neighboring species, and getting ignored by a certain praying mantis-looking civilization that was too busy with internal power struggles to help a stranded human. Krell went very still. You wouldn't. Try me. Dave spent 60 years trying to build something good. I'm not letting you tear it down for political points. The chamber fell silent. Glorp turned a satisfied shade of purple that Tessa's goggles translated as smug approval. 3 months later, Tessa sat in her office filling out the most ridiculous incident report in human history. The title alone was going to give the bureaucrats back home aneurysms. Incident report. How one human with a flashlight accidentally conquered a planet and why we need better protocol for this sort of thing. The Krovenian Empire had ratified its new constitution last week. Vex was still emperor, but now he spent most of his time at ceremonial functions and had discovered a passion for competitive hoverboarding. The newly elected parliament was handling actual governance, and early reports suggested they were doing a decent job. The territorial disputes had been resolved through actual negotiation rather than threats of war. Krell was furious, but had backed down after Tessa made good on her threat to publish Dave's logs. Turned out, having your diplomatic failures immortalized in the historical record was a decent motivator for compromise. Marcus had taken a sabbatical to write a book about Dave titled The Maintenance Technician Who Became God, an oral history of humanity's most awkward first contact. It was already a bestseller in 3 systems. Chirrik had been promoted to chief historical consultant and was working on a comprehensive revision of Krovenian history textbooks. He'd sent Tessa a draft chapter titled David the Divine, pretty good guy, not actually divine, which she'd approved enthusiastically. Glorp had returned to the archives and had sent Tessa a color-changing message that translated to, "This was fun, we should do it again," which was either sweet or ominous depending on interpretation. As for Dave's logs, they'd been made public at Tessa's insistence. The Krovenian population had reacted with a mixture of shock, amusement, and something approaching reverence. Their founder hadn't been a celestial being, but he'd been something better, a good person trying his best in impossible circumstances. The logs had gone viral across human space, too. Dave Martinez had become an icon, the subject of memes, historical documentaries, and at least 6 competing holodramas. Tessa had already seen 3 different actors cast as Dave, none of whom looked anything like him. Her comm unit chirped. It was Vex. "Commander Volk," he said, looking significantly more relaxed than the last time they'd spoken. "I wanted to thank you. The Parliament just approved funding for a new cultural center dedicated to accurate historical education. We're calling it the Dave Martinez Institute for Not Being Terrible." Tessa laughed. "That's a terrible name. Dave would have loved it. Also, we found more of his personal effects. Apparently he kept a cookbook where he tried to recreate human recipes with local ingredients. Would you like a copy?" "Absolutely. Fair warning, there's a recipe for something called pizza that uses fermented cave fungus as cheese. I tried it. It was horrifying. I'll take my chances." After Vex signed off, Tessa returned to her report. She'd been struggling with the conclusion, but Dave's last log had given her clarity. She typed, "Recommendations. Establish clear protocols for stranded personnel in pre-contact civilizations. Provide better emergency supplies, including detailed instructions on not accidentally starting religions." Create a dedicated historical research division to prevent future governmental crises based on ancient misunderstandings. And maybe, most importantly, remember that power doesn't come from bloodlines or divine right or genetic superiority. It comes from what you do with it and whether you use it to help people or hurt them. A maintenance technician with a flashlight understood that 10,000 years ago. We should probably try to live up to his example. Also, if anyone's planning to make Tuesday sky chanting an official holiday, please reconsider. Dave made it up because he was bored, and we should respect his wishes. She attached Dave's logs, Chirrik's genetic analysis, and approximately 600 pages of legal documentation that she sincerely hoped nobody would actually read. Then she submitted the report and leaned back in her chair. Her office window looked out over the council station, where dozens of species coexisted in controlled chaos. Somewhere out there, humanity was still expanding, still exploring, still probably getting into situations they weren't prepared for. If there was another Dave Martinez stranded on an alien world right now, she hoped they'd handle it with as much grace as the original. Her comm unit chirped again. This time it was the Human Colonial Administration. Commander Volk, we've reviewed your preliminary report. We need clarification on several points. First, you're telling us a maintenance technician founded an empire? Yes. With a flashlight? And a socket wrench. And this empire has existed for 10,000 years? Correct. There was a long pause. We're going to need you to present this at the next Colonial Affairs Committee meeting. They're not going to believe it. I've got Dave's cookbook as supporting evidence. There's a recipe for pizza that will haunt your dreams. Even better. Also, we're updating the emergency supplies in all colony ships. What else besides flashlights should we worry about? Tessa thought about it. Duct tape. Definitely duct tape. And maybe a note that says, please don't become a god king. It creates paperwork. Adding that to the list. After she ended the call, Tessa pulled up one of Dave's logs again, one she'd watched a dozen times. It was from day 8,000. Roughly halfway through his life on the Krovenian homeworld. You know what's weird? Dave said to the camera. I came out here to help build a new world for humanity. Instead, I helped build a world for someone else. And that's okay. Better than okay, actually. These people deserve a chance just like we do. Maybe that's what being human really means. Not the DNA or the planet we're from, but the choice to help when we can. Even if it's inconvenient or scary or means we'll never get home. If that's what humanity stands for, then I'm proud to be human. And I hope whoever finds this, Krovenian, or human, or whatever species you are, I hope you're proud too. Tessa closed the file and finished her coffee. It was still against regulations, but at this point she figured she'd earned it. Somewhere in the archives, preserved in a climate-controlled vault, a socket wrench sat in a case marked Sacred Relic. It was still just a socket wrench, but it represented something more. The idea that greatness didn't require divine bloodlines or cosmic destiny. Sometimes it just required a decent person with basic tools and the willingness to help, and really that was the most human thing imaginable.